Always good, everybody. Hope you are having a wonderful week so far. Podcast time. Sam Sciarra is an A&R for Diplo's record label Mad Decent Higher Ground. Works alongside DJ Tennis under his A&R team at Life and Death. Also runs a party in LA called Fast at Work. Sam is an integral part of the electronic music industry and has made some huge decisions over the years, signed some huge records, and worked with some amazing artists. I really wanted to get him on the podcast to talk about the business side of the music industry, the record side of the music industry. And he was one of the most perfect person that I could think of to kind of come on and talk about it. He's extremely passionate about what he does, and he's extremely good at what he does. So I thought I'd get him on. So without further ado, Sam Sciarra. And we are live. What's cooking, Sam? How are you doing, mate?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you, man?
Yeah, really good. Thanks for coming on. I'm actually really excited to have you on. I think this podcast is full up with artists, and as much as you are an artist, like I think it's really interesting to kind of have like the industry kind of represented as well. So kind of let's start out with, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Sam, aka Sam Wise. Basically, I'm an A&R, kind of first and foremost. For the last like 8 plus years, I've been I've been an A&R at Mad Decent, and an A&R for Diplo, and about 5 years ago. Together, we started a label called Higher Ground, which I have been running from an A&R side and also as a brand. So kind of developed the whole concept alongside Diplo, and we kind of worked through like what the A&R was going to look like and what our direction would be. And since then, I've been kind of running that and kind of signing and developing talent through the label.
Cool.
Alongside that, I also have several other clients outside of my work for Higher Ground and Diplo. I work with DJ Tennis as his A&R, and I also do A&R for his label, Life and Death, alongside just a bunch of other just consulting type work. Really anything that's kind of needed from a label A&R side. I'm kind of there as like a sounding board or a dot connector. And then I work with some artists independently as well, namely some jet management clients. I work with Dombreski as kind of his ear. That's kind of the gist of what I do. I've had a wide range of industry jobs the last decade plus, which is crazy to say. I worked at, it's like insane saying that. But yeah, so that's kind of what I do now. But I've had my hand in a lot of different things. I would say the only other thing of note that I do is I'm also a DJ and a selector myself. I've been really involved in the LA underground scene for many years. About 4 years ago, we started a party called Fast at Work, which has since evolved into a label. We kind of champion a kind of fast, but not necessarily hard style of electronic music through our underground parties, which are very much rooted in kind of an American DIY ethos, but kind of a more European-oriented sound. So, yeah, that's kind of what I do.
You do a shit ton by the sounds of it. Like
so much.
I knew you did a lot, but I didn't know you did that much.
Yeah.
I knew you're kind of like 4 main things: the Fast at Work, Mad Decent, Higher Ground, and Life and Death. But I didn't know you kind of did the side things. So for anyone listening, like, I kind of want to bring it back to the beginning of like, what is an AR? What is a role of an A&R?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's funny because whenever I'm chatting with someone just like casually that I haven't really met before, and then a lot of times not, industry people, they'll be like, I'll be like, oh, I'm an A&R, and they're like, oh, okay. And then I'll be like, do you know what that is? And I don't ever mean that to be like, you're dumb, you should know that. But like largely people don't understand what it actually is. And it's such an intangible role in a lot of ways and differs between, the company that you're at or the artist that you're affiliated with. But basically, the best way I can describe it is it's kind of like a combination of artist relations and creative direction. The artist relations part kind of refers to just being the point person for any artist that's associated with the label or the project or the company that you're working with, and kind of being there as a resource for them, kind of being there as their person to come to if they have any sort of question, issue, and also just being a sounding board for any sort of issues or things that come up. But then the most important part of it is the creative direction side. And this is kind of in reference specifically to the actual recording process, as well as the actual music part of, the company, artist, or whatever project you're working on. So I basically scout for new talent. I have relationships with artists, and I kind of bring them into the fold within whatever capacity that might mean. But then my style is I'm a very active A&R.
Yeah.
So I am very much, engaged in the recording process. I work with the artist, producer, writer on any sort of, feedback that they might need. The way that I like to describe it is I like to get records from wherever they are, whether that be 50% done, or maybe it's just a work in progress idea at 25%. Maybe it's largely fleshed out at 75% or whatever. And then I help them get it to 100%. So I help
Mm.
them get it to a place where it's actually ready to be released. And that could mean feedback, like I was saying, or it could mean connecting them with a mix engineer that makes sense. Maybe there's an
Yeah.
additional producer that should come on board and help them get to where it should be, or maybe it needs a vocal feature, so I'll help them with that. Maybe it just needs remixes or a great mastering job. I mean, sometimes
Mm.
it's simple and sometimes it's more intensive, but it's really being there as a sounding board
I think
for
also
the
I think
project.
I think also it's a massive thing about relationships and
Mm,
how you kind of like every individual person is very different.
sure.
And every artist, you have to speak to every artist very differently. Some
Hmm.
people like the honest feedback, some people don't. So you kind of have to go around the houses a little bit to kind of get the best product out of some people. I know
Mm,
as a producer DJ, sometimes hearing feedback on a record that you think is an absolute bomb, and then hearing feedback from an A&R that you actually don't agree with, but
yeah.
kind of compromise is so key when it comes to relationships. How
Yeah.
how did you kind of learn the compromise of working in this industry? Because I think it's really key.
Yeah, I think the relationships aspect is like 100% on point because, and I think it's probably as I've progressed further along my A&R journey or what have you, I learned more and more that really what it was about is actually just earning and creating a sense of trust between
Mm.
you and the artist that you're working with. Um, and just kind of having, I think, I think there's two sides of it. I think it's spending time with the artist and treating them as a friend, as a human being, and not really putting them on. I think there's obviously in the world that we live in, there's such this culture of celebrity, and we put artists on these pedestals, and we kind of project this kind of like meaning onto them. But the reality is, these are just people. So I
Yeah.
think when you approach the relationship from that angle, you're really able to kind of like create this kind of sense of trust with them, and that's just the same kind of trust that you would have with any sort of person that you meet,
Mm.
and that would come into your life. So I realized that that was probably the most important thing. But then, in addition to that, when it comes to feedback, like you were saying, or whatever it is, it's also about approaching it with the right tone. It's also about like really understanding like who this artist is, what level of involvement or need they have for an outside perspective in their music. Some artists are crazy self-sufficient and do like to do
Yeah.
everything themselves. They're very conceptual. And largely there's like, sometimes they just want an A&R to be like, yeah, this is great, or,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe this doesn't fit, or whatever it is, and that's the way that you can get through to them. Other artists are super receptive. They need help, they want to
Yeah.
progress, they want to collab, they want to do all sorts of stuff. So I think it's all about like, learning how to communicate tone wise, you know, depending on whatever project or artist you're working on. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense, and I think that is it's the tightrope you guys do as A&Rs.
Yeah.
I think there's like you said, like for example, for me is like generally in an A&R process is I generally don't have that process. It's like me just sending
Mm,
records to somebody and go, here's a record.
yeah.
And then sometimes getting feedback. But I think like I've recently written an album and I wrote it sounds very selfish, but I purposely didn't have a record label to sign to
Mm,
before I'd finished the album completely. So there
right.
wasn't an A&R process. The A&R process was like finding an A&R that actually believes in the project. And I think that's the thing
Hmm.
is like A&Rs have to kind of put on every different hat and depending on the artist,
Mm.
um, kind of like a therapist.
Yeah, definitely like a therapist. Oh my God. Absolutely. I can't tell you the amount of conversations I've had with artists that are like, they're concerned about something or they don't think it's working, or it's really more just like a personal kind of like, what do I do type
Yeah.
conversation, and you have to just really you have to be a really good listener, I think,
Yeah.
But I also think like, it's a bit different within dance music. Like,
Yeah.
like I think that you pointed out something really, really, interesting and very specific to the world in which we operate. Like doing A&R in the pop world or the urban world or, the singer songwriter world is completely different than the ecosystem, within dance
Mm.
music. And I think like a huge point of that is like the fact that a lot of times artists aren't in big exclusive,
Yeah.
multi-album deals. They want and need the freedom to release on a wide range of labels and have the opportunities to, put something out on Nervous and then come back and put it out on Higher Ground and then go to
Yeah.
Yearly. Like, you know what I mean? That's kind of how they build their cred, and also how the larger industry like kind of starts to take notice in regards to like, the types of stages they can play and the types
Yeah.
of projects they can do and who they are as an artist, producer, performer, etc. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons, to be honest, that I started to work more independently in the last year. And, I started to work more closely with tennis and have independent clients. I think it's because I've noticed that there isn't so much emphasis on like this territorial nature that I think is kind of associated with A&Rs at major labels, or was associated with A&Rs like, within the last 10, 15, 20 years, like this old school kind of view of A&R isn't really like what is happening right now within dance
Yeah.
music. I think artists kind of need someone who is really just like on their side and can help feed the right records to the right places, if that makes sense.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's also a really interesting time in this industry because I totally agree with what you're saying on dance records
Mm,
being not like pop, but I would also
right.
disagree with that. I'd kind of push back on that now and see that dance music is so commercial now.
Mm,
It is pop music to a certain extent, right? And
right.
the likes of like the biggest people out there, like what they're releasing is like Billboard number ones, etc., etc. Like they're doing serious numbers. Do you
Hmm.
think that changes your A&R process of like looking for records because it's like you can see the business changing, like extreme investments coming into the industry? And I'm not saying that you specifically is like going down that route, but like are you seeing it from others?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's an interesting question to ask, because yes, I think when you look at it from like a musical perspective, that definitely is
Yeah,
happening. There's obviously more and more. I mean, in general, there's been, I think musically things have changed a lot over the last like, decade. I think what's happened is you've seen what was EDM in America, right, has really just become
yeah,
pop.
yeah,
And then what is what we like, used to think of as tech house is now EDM.
yeah,
you know? So it's like, yes, there's definitely been a musical shift. And I think, it's important to remain aware of that. And as someone who works for a label, obviously you have a certain kind of like responsibility to make money for the company.
yeah,
So you
totally.
obviously need to be aware of that and, try to make something viable from a business perspective. However, I would also say that, I think even more importantly, what's happened is with the kind of rise of social media and how it informs artists' careers and, also like simultaneously the evolution of streaming and how important that's been in artists' careers, et cetera. There's all sorts of different confluence of factors. What I've really noticed is actually even more than just the fact that music has gotten more commercial sounding or whatever. I think artists have had to embrace a sense of authenticity
Yeah.
in who they are and what their project is and how to kind of convey that to the wider public and their audience. And honestly, if I'm being real, I think the only thing that really like matters nowadays and the only thing that is really going to make an artist successful is a sense of authenticity with the project. I think if you're
Mm,
coming at it from this kind of like, I'm just gonna like kind of jump on a trend and now I'm gonna make, tech house slash EDM or whatever. But it's not really. It's coming from a more of a place of like, I just want to be big and I just want to be
yeah.
successful. Like these young kids, they sniff right through that shit.
Yeah.
They see
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
through that shit, and like you can't have a viable long-term successful career as an artist if you just hop on trends. If you
Mm,
truly believe in the music you're creating, if you convey who you are as an artist and a human through your platforms, through your content, through whatever, then yeah, you do have the opportunity to become a successful long-term artist. In fact, I think that's really the only way, in my opinion. So I think that's like, people always ask me, what are you looking for in an artist or what are you looking for in a
yeah.
project, And I'm like, honestly, it sounds annoying, but like authenticity.
Yeah.
Like, who are you? Like, what is your music saying? Like, yeah, okay, it sounds like this. It could be super big commercial stuff, but there's authentically some artists that are really into that stuff
I think that's
and
the thing,
really
isn't it? Is like there's so many artists that are extremely successful that
mm,
are making more commercial music that are
mm-hmm.
just fucking great pop
Yeah,
writers. Like I've worked with Jax Jones quite a lot, and
yeah,
like
he's amazing.
we've had these chats, and he's like, dude, I just love making hooks. And I think
Totally.
that, and I love that. And
Same.
when you see people like that try and go do something cool because they need to be cool, you're like, dude, this isn't you. Like,
Right.
go fucking write a hit. You're great at it. You're better at it than most people. You have an ability to do something most of us don't have. So go do
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree with that. I guess I guess a question for you that like how this isn't me being disrespectful as well, so please, I'm genuinely like trying to kind of get the question of, so we now live in uh, a time where social media is so important
Mm,
for artists, but also social media has given artists platforms
right.
massively.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily say this kind of stands for you because the labels that you work with have huge platforms and they
Mm-hmm.
have great associations for people to sign to. But how important nowadays is a record label?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's kind of two sides. I think there's, again, like it's a two-sided answer. On the
Yeah.
one hand, they are less and less important because
Mm,
you have, I think, as an artist, so many options now. You
yeah.
have so many different distributors that you can work with. You have so many, you technically could really do everything yourself with the tools at hand. And I think a lot of artists are doing that. And I think
Yeah.
it's great, you know? I do think there is value in a label because I think that you get a lot of different resources that you don't normally get, that you can't get when you're just doing everything yourself. That I
Yeah.
think artists kind of need when it comes to the progression of their careers. So
What
they need the
what are they?
experience.
What are
I
those
think
resources?
I think it's I think it's building their. I think the streaming part is really important. You know,
Yeah.
I look at like the impact of like my streaming team at Mad Decent, super incredibly talented streaming team. You know, and they have direct relationships that they've built over many years with all the major DSPs. They are
Yeah.
constantly communicating with people, real people on those teams for opportunities, for activations, for covers, for whatever it is. You know, not that that's necessarily like, you know, sometimes you get lucky and you get these things, but I
Of
think that
course.
really makes a difference. And working with a label that really has built that over a number of years and has that credibility in the wider landscape is really important. I think the A&R thing is important as well. If you get a good A&R that you trust at a label that has, you know, a really, really good ear, that is really able to kind of guide you where you need to go. You know, another important thing that kind of echoes what I was saying is the importance of collaboration nowadays. I think that if you're a young fledgling artist, you kind of like need to embrace collaboration. And I think that having an amazing A&R, an amazing team at a label behind you that can really make those things happen, connect those dots for you, that makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think also just generally having the experience of working with a label is really important because I think that it kind of gives you a sense of, you know, what it's like to like have kind of a larger business, you know, structure behind your label, maybe have more
Totally.
money behind your project, not necessarily need to self fund everything and do everything yourself. um, so I think that there are still advantages, and then there's also the cultural impact of this, which is something that's a bit more intangible. It's like, you know, being affiliated with a label and being affiliated with a storied catalog like is important. It can
Mm.
really boost things, you know, it can really
Yeah.
make people within the industry, artists, you know, A&Rs, label presidents, executives, whoever, really pay attention, you know. So I think that's also an important thing that you don't get from just doing everything yourself. I do think there is an advantage to doing things yourself, but I think that it's largely more advantageous for someone who's been in the game a little bit longer and really knows what they're doing, has a distinct, very cohesive vision for what they're doing moving forward,
Mm.
and doesn't necessarily need those things slash has experienced them before.
Yeah, and I think it's also somebody that versus having a platform and not having a platform, right? I think if you're
Yeah,
starting out,
right.
classic, even for me, I can only speak from experience. Like the reason why I had a career touring America and kind of
Mm,
releasing records was because of Dirty Bird. At the end of the day,
right.
at that time, there does come a point when I think associations can stunt your growth and
Sure.
they can kind of hold you back.
Hmm.
Um, but that's also down to the artist to pivot and kind of grow in the industry and kind of work out that you can't just stay in one place at one time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, I think this is just super also important to note, like, this business is changing every day. It's one of the
Yeah.
fastest changing, you know, quickest to evolve kind of parts of any creative industry. And I think dance music, just the way that it's created, you know, how quick moving it is in terms of how, you know, you produce it, really also kind of stretches into the business side of things as well. You know, it's always changing. You know, people's, you know, perceptions of things are always changing. And I think it's also a responsibility of the artist to remain aware of that. You know, I think, you know, especially post COVID, we saw a lot of artists' careers kind of like stall because they
Yeah.
didn't really know how to embrace such a quick shift
Yeah.
culturally, business wise, whatever it was. And they ended up getting left behind. So I think you make a really, really good point there.
Yeah, I think it was a strange time, the COVID, because the COVID, it was,
That
it was
COVID
like,
thing, forgot about that.
there's literally some artists that have just like their careers completely stopped.
Right.
And I think there's a level of like, to a certain extent, I agree with some people didn't know what to do, but I think there's also a level of arrogance of like
Mm,
expectations from certain artists where you expect to just go back on the touring game, if you know what I mean. But a whole
yeah,
generation missed going out to clubs, and
absolutely.
your whole fan base changed. They all had kids and got married and
Mm,
bought dogs and can't leave the house and aren't listening to dance music anymore. It's
yeah.
definitely different. I've actually noticed it more post COVID, how quickly the industry changes compared to beforehand.
Mm,
Um, and I think it was, I don't know about your thoughts, but I think pre COVID, you could kind of guarantee, not guarantee, but you were like, if a record was, if you thought a record was going to do well and like you had a certain amount of signs to show that the record was doing what could do well, it would do well usually.
right. Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, I feel like you just, I don't know if you know, but for me is like there's no telling signs if the record's going to do well.
No, honestly, I same with same with
Yeah.
me. Some days I feel like it's just like throwing shit at a wall
Yeah.
and just hoping
Yeah.
some shit sticks, to be honest. And like, yeah, it's hard, you know. But I also think in a weird way it was also good because I think like for me the thing that I, always think about and the thing that was the most miraculous for me, like I mean, I'm like a culture nut, like I'm always just thinking about the wider, larger macro like
Yeah.
things that are shifting and how that's changing, how music is changing because of that and whatever. Like I think what was also kind of beautiful about the whole COVID thing was like I think before COVID, there was such like it's interesting. I think there was people were so they brought their kind of like boundaries, stereotypes, niches, cliques into the dance music world. So, certain parties, certain labels, whatever, had a very distinct kind of like crowd and a very distinct, and because of that, like people were very, they were very pretentious about the music that they listened to. Like, oh, my
Yeah.
music's like this music's better than the music you listen to. And it was all just very stratified, if that makes sense. Then, because events just stopped during COVID, I think people just had all this time to actually like listen to other music and kind of let
Yeah.
go of those that pretentiousness and those boundaries and those stereotypes about different types of music. I think people wanted to listen to fun music again and wanted to kind of be transported to a better atmosphere. And, because of that, more like, more like cheesy stuff kind of rose to the surface
Mm,
and like hooks and like just things that you could sing along to and catchy music, etc. And that wasn't necessarily like people just wanted that. They wanted to
yeah.
they went from pre-COVID wanting to hear the same of everything at a party, and then post-COVID they wanted to hear a little bit of everything at a party. So
Yeah.
that drastically, I think, changed these kind of deeply rooted like scenes and circles that exist and really broke them down. And I think the artists that really embraced that shift are the ones who are still really successful and really,
Mm,
really well respected in our world today. And I think that the ones who didn't, unfortunately, are kind of like still floundering.
yeah, I agree. I agree. I want to talk about Higher Ground.
Hmm.
I can't exactly remember when Higher Ground started.
Hmm.
But I know it's a newer thing, if that makes
Hmm.
sense, in the
Yeah.
sense of record labels for what Diplo's done and for you. I kind of want to like literally go back from day one of like the conversations behind Higher Ground, because I kind of want people to kind of get in the mindset of like, what are those conversations you're having as a team and why? Like that's the main thing, is like why. Like Diplo had Mad Decent. right?
Hmm.
It had a very successful record label. Okay, Higher Ground. Why do
Hmm.
you want to start a new record label? What's the point? Like,
Yeah.
culturally, what is the reasons behind all of this as well?
Great question. I also feel like, interestingly, it kind of bleeds from what I was just talking about uh, into the answer to this question. Is like, I think, you know, post COVID, well, we started it right before COVID, but
Yeah,
there was, I mean, what was happening was Wes was making and creating a lot of house music. And, I think he's someone who has always evolved throughout his career, in terms of, the sounds that he's incorporating in his music, and the cultures in which he's, bouncing between, and how to kind of like make those cultures work together and those sounds work together. And so there's a storied kind of legacy of that within the larger kind of like context of Mad Decent. So when he started wanting to create more house music, we started kind of testing the waters. We put out this original EP called the Higher Ground EP. Um, Great record, and it did really well. We felt that people really like latched onto it. The success from a streaming perspective was really strong. So then, we kind of were like, maybe there's a space for a new player in the label side, and I think that what I was saying before was something that we were also kind of all frustrated with. I think we were all kind of like, how come every single record that comes out on this certain label that is really massive in the house music world sounds exactly the same?
yeah,
How come the crowd is so homogenous?
yeah,
I think something that made Mad Decent distinct, and something that still makes it unique, is like it always kind of championed a wide range of music sounds. You never really knew what you were going to get, but it all kind of
mm,
worked together. It all kind of made sense under this like kind of cohesive label, creative, whatever umbrella that we had. So it's like, why couldn't we apply the same general ethos to a label within the house music space?
yeah,
And so that's kind of what we did. I think we developed, we thought really long and hard about how do we make, a label that puts out everything from Afro house to melodic house to tech house to commercial vocal house to some techno leaning stuff, to really whatever it is within the house and techno market. How do we make it all work together and make it make sense? We did
yeah,
that through developing a unified creative aesthetic. We have this amazing branding and this amazing creative, um, largely developed by my colleague Jackson Green, amazing designer. Um, and we really worked hard to kind of make something that would not only work, from kind of like had a lot of odes to like the history of, house and
yeah,
techno, but also something that would continue to be kind of repurposed over and over again in a different way, that artists could, customize and, feel attached to from a personal level, but also that generally from a branding perspective made it all make sense.
yeah.
So that was kind of like some of the conversations that were going on behind the scenes, and still the things that we carry forward now.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you guys have done, because I think I totally agree with you in the sense of record labels still to a certain extent in the dance music industry is so one track minded.
Yeah.
And like I understand it. I totally understand it. Like
Hmm.
let's just throw some ideas out there, like drum code, right? Absolutely love and respect them, but realistically, there comes a point where the sound gets so repetitive. Same with
Yeah.
Dirty Bird. It
Totally.
gets it's so repetitive that
Hmm.
you kind of alienate people to you kind of like halt evolution in people's tastes.
Sure.
And I think the whole in my idea in my concept, a record label is there to kind of feed the audience, but also like educate the audience and bring them new things. And I
Absolutely.
think it's kind of got lost over the years when it's just been so business orientated, it's so brand
Right.
orientated, where it's like this record label sounds like this, or like Hot Creation sounds like this, like I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
Dirty Bird sounds like this, Repopulate Mars sounds like this, and I think the interesting thing that I've seen from an outsider's point of view with Higher Ground, obviously we know Diplo is kind of the head artist of it, but
Mm.
I think that is also the most beautiful thing about it, because Diplo doesn't have a sound,
Yeah, totally.
and and I think that's so important. Like the biggest record labels I look up to, like Ninja Tune, like
Mm.
XL, like Prodigy and Adele,
Mm-hmm.
just complete worlds apart. And I'm really interested to see the music industry, not the music industry, the like underground house scene, techno scene, electronic scene, to kind of try and embrace this a little bit more.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
I think I think it makes shows way more interesting.
Absolutely.
Um, like I'm fortunate enough, and without aging myself, that I come from days where like in one night you'd have like somebody playing like soulful house, and then in the
Mm.
second room you'd have somebody playing like trance, and then
Right.
in the third room you'd have someone playing drum and bass,
Totally.
and then in the main room you'd have like techno.
Mm.
And I think like the festivals have kind of helped that, but I think club nights have just been halted by record labels and artists just signing the same artist over and over and over again.
Right.
And I mean the same artist, I mean the same sound.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's not that interesting, if I'm honest. It's
No,
not that interesting.
it's extremely boring. And I think you're totally right. Like, there's zero. I think you made such a good point. It's that labels and largely like music brands, even if they're like a party brand only or whatever, and they don't have an imprint side of it, they are like, I think they have a fundamental like kind of responsibility
Mm,
to educate people, to push them.
yeah,
I mean, I thought a lot about this lately. On like a more like personal level, I feel that I've learned over the years, like there's kind of two sides to like there's two sides to like ravers, right?
yeah,
Like there's people who approach dance music, electronic music, and the act of like raving and going to these parties as kind of a way for them to escape, right?
yeah,
They're just there. They want to just completely forget everything. They want to just, get fucked up or whatever, and that's it. Fine, that's great. Like that's, important, of course. But then there's also this other side of the dance music community who treat it as a way to actually engage with music, with, who they are, with what their beliefs are. Like there's this term, this cliche, dance floor therapy. Like I believe in that. Like if
yeah,
you really approach like, dance music and electronic music and the dance floor as a kind of catalyst for your personal growth, then I think that there's a whole world of evolution that you can discover both on a personal level and a cultural level. And I think that in my opinion, the brands that really and the labels that really embrace this kind of ethos are the ones who are really like last the longest and have the most storied
yeah,
success, because it's really important. And like I totally agree with you regarding the underground scene thing, because like I felt that what I was saying before about pretentiousness in dance music, like pre-COVID versus post-COVID, I was just like, I can't anymore with that, in the underground
yeah,
space. Like, yes, I love underground music. I'm so into underground music, but where's the education? Like, where's the evolution? Where's the kind of like embrace of, us learning new things or being pushed,
yeah,
our boundaries changing. And I think like, that's one of the reasons that we started Fast at Work. We were
yeah,
craving a party, a place within the LA underground scene that really embraced that, and really
mm,
wanted to kind of like do everything from jungly stuff to, fast prog infused house to, like trancy techno to whatever it is, and really
yeah,
change people's minds in this community about what dance music can do, and how it can make you think.
yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. I guess playing devil's advocate, we're talking about labels not specifically, us wanting labels to not specifically have sounds, right? And it's in a sense of like it does, but it's kind of encompassing over on an overall scale. What's your thoughts on artists having sounds? Because I think there's a key thing to a certain extent where we need, as an artist, we need an identity, right? I think if I put a trance record out tomorrow and then a hip hop record out tomorrow, 2 weeks later, people are gonna be like, "What the fuck?" Like, so how do you,
I mean, I
as an
would be
A and
down.
R, but like as an A&R,
No,
like
I totally hear you.
what's the advice in that situation?
I think it kind of is related to like this kind of authenticity question. I think that yes, like of course it's important to kind of like, especially if you have an existing audience, right? If you have an
Yeah,
existing audience that's been there with you for a long time and, consistently comes to your gigs and, is really a kind of generator for your career, you do have a bit of a responsibility to them to, I don't know, like be who they know that you are. But I
yeah,
also think you, on the flip side, have a responsibility to evolve as an artist. And I think that there's
mm-hmm.
a way to do that where it's not so much about the specific way that things are sounding, right? It's also about like, who are you and what are the specific elements that you've brought into your production process and your sound, but that is something still new and is still authentic to you and how you're changing, right? But that also kind of plays into what you've created before. So that
Yeah,
could be just bringing in a couple of little small sounds that you've historically used throughout your career and applying them to something new, and
yeah,
different, and making and that being the way to make sense. But I think that you can do it in a wide range of different ways. That's not just related to the actual production side of it. That's also related to like, I don't know, just like your general kind of like image and what you project
yeah,
and what you kind of are talking about and pushing forth as an artist. So, I think that it's also like, I don't even know if this is generally a point, but the last thing I'll say on this topic is like, I think that there's a big difference between your sound and just what people are hearing, and also like what you have to say as an artist, right?
yeah,
What are you saying? Like, what's your message? Where's this coming from?
mm,
And I think it's just really crucial to like think about that, and make that distinction because I don't think that they're necessarily the same thing. And I think, when they come together, that's an authentic artist, right?
yeah. Agreed. I think also you hit the nail on the head. In my opinion,
Mm,
I also totally agree that realistically it's just great storytelling.
yeah,
And I
totally.
think like what you say in your music, actually a lot of the time, especially in electronic music,
Hmm.
can't be put into words. So how are you putting it into words?
Yep.
How do people evolve with you, and how do people kind of interact with you? I think that's the most important thing. I think you can completely alienate your fans
Mm,
if you don't tell the story correctly. And I think sometimes there's actually a beautiful part about the alienation of fans. I
yeah.
think some people can look at it as a negative, but I think as long as at some point along the line of that alienation, you then explain what you're doing, I
Mm,
think I think it comes around beautifully. And I think we people aren't stupid. And I know
no, they're not.
I know people say like treat everyone like they're stupid because they're not giving you as much attention, especially on social media. But I think realistically, your true fans really care about you, and they
Yeah.
really do get involved with everything you do, whether that's one person, whether that's 100,000 people. I think it's just about telling the story in the correct way. And I think there needs to be a lot of teamwork behind that. I don't think that necessarily has to be one person and one artist. I think that is that's a job with, there's a discussion between the A&R management, artist, everyone. It's a whole discussion of like, okay, how this artist wants to talk about this in their life. They
Mm,
want to kind of talk about this. The music's not saying this. How do we discuss this? How do we portray this to the bigger world? It's
yeah.
definitely interesting.
No, absolutely. 100%.
Um, Higher ground. I want to kind of go back a little bit to that,
Okay.
and talk about the overall picture.
Hmm.
When you sit down and start releasing records, um, is there ever like a business goal behind that? Is there ever like this record label needs to, obviously financially needs to make money,
Mm,
but do you set that from the get go, or is that something that you like? Let's just see. Because I'm really interested with you guys. Obviously, you have a smooth running business, right? It's an oiled
yeah.
machine of what you guys do at Mad Decent.
Hmm.
So I think like I like to talk about the financial side of things because I think people need to hear about it. We're in the music business. You work in the music business.
Hmm.
So what are those? Okay, you've got the reasoning of why you started Higher Ground,
Hmm.
but I guess there's also has to be financial goals in that.
Yeah, totally. I absolutely. I mean, in general, it's a business, and this,
Yeah,
labels are a business, artists are a business, everything is a business. Like, this is
yeah,
just the world that we live in. I think we don't come into the year or, a project or whatever looking at like specifically like the amount of money we need to create.
of course.
Obviously
Yeah,
there is a part of how we formulate, negotiate, and sign deals that is based on the realistic, revenue that we might earn,
yeah,
and the artist might earn. Of course, that's just generally how you negotiate and create, make a fair deal that makes sense to everyone involved. But I think like from kind of a more like macro level, I guess, if you will, like what we do is, and this is kind of an interesting take on everything, but I think that what we try to do is have a couple of, we know throughout the year that we have to make some money, right? So
of course.
we are always keeping our eye out for a couple of bigger, high level projects
Yeah,
that are largely more commercial sounding, probably have more of an opportunity to do really well at DSPs and sell a lot more records. And look, those are going to be our money makers for the year,
yeah,
and we kind of just accept that. And they always are good, and we always believe in them. It's not like we're just like, oh, here's a commercial record, like let's put it out, whatever.
yeah,
No, fuck that. It always has to absolutely work within the larger scheme of our direction at the moment. But like, yeah, we need those records absolutely,
mm,
and I don't think there's anything wrong with having like, I look at some of these labels that are so hyper, like, back to what I was saying about the pretentiousness thing. They're so hyper focused, and it's like, ugh, whatever. Like,
yeah,
like that does nothing really to push things forward at all or evolve at all. So, anyways, we have those big records, that are really kind of our drivers financially for the
yeah,
year. Then on the flip side of that, we sign a lot of smaller up and coming stuff that is really dope and really like
yeah,
new and different and pushing things in a different direction. And I think that it's kind of cool that we're able to have both sides, and have that be a viable financial model. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that that's kind of how we look at things. But I won't say that there's like a moment where we're like, we map out everything for the year and it's
yeah,
all
yeah.
like, like we're doing it kind of organically as it flows.
Well, I think also the music industry just doesn't work like that,
No,
right? You don't even you could have a big record of what you think and it doesn't do what it needs to do, right?
sure.
And I think that is the joys of that.
Right.
What's been your big wins for you?
Just in general.
Yeah, I think like there's two levels of it, right? There's a record that's like done really well,
Mm,
like that you're
yeah,
like really proud of that you weren't expecting it to do well, and then there's a
yeah,
record that you expected it to do well and it did really well. I think there's two ways to look at it.
yeah, totally. I mean, I think I actually was just looking at this. There's a record, we did a couple of records actually with Jay Wara a few years ago.
Yeah,
And I remember this was actually a really cool one. I remember when I started working with her, I think she's amazing. And Jamie sent me this record, and I was like, immediately, like, I remember hearing it and being like, this is it. Like, like,
yeah,
this is like, not necessarily like this is a hit, but like, people are going to love this. I just was
yeah,
like, I just knew instantly. And we really didn't change. It was so cool because like I was saying before, like I'm a very active A&R. There's usually like a process in which I go through with the project where I like to kind of get it to a certain way. I barely did any of that with her on this. I was like, this is great. I really love this record. Like we basically kind of wrapped it up and put it out, and it was just a very easy, smooth process. Anyways, it just surpassed like 100 million streams on Spotify alone,
wow,
which is just mind blowing to me. I'm just like, wow. Like it was just one of
that's
those
insane.
records like that I just had a feeling about, and we put it out, and it was so easy. Everyone was just happy with everything. I remember even creating the art was easy. Working with her and her team were fantastic. And then it's just like, here we are a few years later, 100 million
Yeah,
streams. I think that's a big win, and just exactly like what an ideal experience of working with an artist is, because there's no tension. There's no one's like pissed about something or how it was. It was
yeah.
just easy from the start, and then it succeeded. And it's not like I would have ever anticipated it succeeding that much, but that was really, really
Mm.
cool. So yeah, that's definitely probably like answering your one side, like success, like hit or whatever. Um,
That was
but
check. Was that check out or
yeah,
check? The
check
record
out
was
is the
called
record.
check out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's on my mind too, because I think it just surpassed that number. And Jamie made a post about it, and I was like, "Holy moly! Like, what the hell? How
100
the hell
million
did
is a lot of streams
it's
just on
so
Spotify.
many?" Well, and it's
For
cool too because like for an artist like Jamie, like that's a big deal. She's not
massive.
Dua Lipa. Like she's not like that's like it's not like this is just a notch on her belt. Like that is like a massive milestone for her, and to
Yeah.
be somebody who helped make that happen just is super fulfilling, and I'm just really proud of her and being involved in that.
Yeah, that's amazing, man.
Yeah,
That's
that
it's
was really
special.
cool.
So what more on the commercial side of things where you like, okay, this record's gonna do well.
Yeah, I feel like that's a tough one. I feel that also working on the album that we put out, Diplo's self-titled album, was really
Yeah.
fulfilling. Um, and there were a number of like milestones and awards and accolades and stuff that
Yeah.
happened. But I think this kind of goes back to thing, a larger thing that I feel for me personally is more important as a win. I think that working on that project was really cool because we were able to kind of take a lot of different sides of what was buzzy, but what really mattered as well within the house music ecosystem and just general like credible dance music world. And through collaborations and connections, we were able to kind of create something that also was still really authentic and really,
Yeah.
kind of achieved, credibility within the larger
Yeah.
market. And I think that was really, really cool to be a part of, to kind of give, an artist like Seth Troxler or Tisha or whoever it was an opportunity to collaborate with an artist like Diplo. It's a
Yeah.
huge deal. And it's really amazing for them to kind of have this opportunity to go more commercial, but also still remain credible and not sacrifice any of the, you know, um,
Yeah.
any of the kind of credibility they've built in their
Well, it wasn't
careers.
an it wasn't an EDM album. It
No,
was a house
exactly.
music album, and I think that was it was kind of a pivotal moment for the industry as well, I think, because having Diplo collaborate with a bunch, of course he can collaborate with whoever he wants, right?
Right,
Like
right.
in the grand scheme of thing, Diplo sends you a DM and wants to collaborate with you.
Hmm.
Not many people are saying no.
Sure,
Um, so I think like just having, I think there's a level of respect of having the ability to able to collaborate with anybody you want, and you chose a handful of people that were all in the underground scene. I
sure.
get it, right?
Yeah,
I get the, I also get the like the side of it where it also aligns him with the people that he wants to align with the
yeah.
record label. I totally get that.
Hmm.
But you don't need to do that, right? You're Diplo.
No,
So I think there's something amazing about what that album did for multiple people. Again, like there's a lot of artists that do it over the years. Like David Guetta is exactly
sure.
the same.
Yeah,
Tiesto, that like there's there's been moments where like when Guetta collabed with Black Coffee at the time of when Black Coffee was probably the coolest person around at that time,
yeah.
and it kind of bridged two worlds. And I think
Right.
there's, again, it goes back to that thing of what we were talking about with the record label, is like bridging gaps between super commercial and super underground is so important.
I totally agree, 100%. And I think that was a really, really cool experience to be able to facilitate. And I'm just really proud of how that album turned out.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, 100% agree. Thanks for the kind words.
No worries, man. When it comes to artists,
Hmm.
what should an artist look for in a record label?
Um, I think it comes down to the people, to be
Yeah,
honest. I think more than the, I mean, yeah, I think that obviously success, credibility, the ability to do right by your music and your projects and whatever it is that you're doing is super important. But I think even more than that, it's the people. I think it's
yeah,
like I was saying, finding an A&R who you can really build trust with, finding a team, a streaming team, and people who are really understand you as much as possible, understand the narrative and the meaning and the authenticity behind your music, your project, whatever it is that you're going to work on together, is probably the most important thing. Because if you have a team behind this that is really working from a side of things where they get you and they really like love
yeah,
what you're doing and they want to push that out to the industry, that's also, I don't think it in the end necessarily what matter it really matters what label it's on, but if you have that team that's really like pushing things and really believes in you, it will be successful.
yeah,
You know, and I think that sometimes, unfortunately, like artists look at like this credible brand or this, they put these kind of companies on these pedestals because of like who they are, and then eventually they get a chance to work with them, but they don't really get like the actual personal attention that whatever it is they've spent so much time on deserves.
yeah,
So they end up kind of getting lost in the fray of things. And it's just unfortunate because they've just put this kind of perception of coolness above like actually who's going to do right by your art. So I think that's is
yeah.
really human. The humans behind it are the most important thing.
I totally agree. I think it's also really hard to, especially nowadays. I think for me, the biggest bit of advice I would give is just go in with zero expectations.
Totally agree.
Because I think like going into, like, I've done it previously where like I've signed records to people and had an expectation, and
Yeah.
like realistically no one owes you anything.
Mm.
um at the end of the day, like, we're all working together. No one wants, you sign a record to a record label, they don't want the record to fail.
Hmm.
If they've done everything in their power to do everything, to make the record succeed, and the record hasn't succeeded, it's no one's fault to a certain extent.
Amen. I
I
totally agree.
I guess my my question though is not question but kind of statement, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. There is a responsibility for a record label, and there is a responsibility of actually delivering.
Hmm.
Um, you can't deliver all the time, right? But I guess how do you work that when you know you need to deliver, but the delivering isn't happening, if you know what I mean?
I think you have honest, real, transparent communication about it, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like, and I think that it comes from, again, probably a an unrealistic expectation in from and it can go both sides. The label can have an unrealistic expectation of the artist and what they're going to put in, or the
yeah,
artist can have an unrealistic expectation of what the label can achieve for them, you know? But I think the crux of it is that there's probably a misalignment in some way as to where both sides are at, you know,
yeah,
in some way, shape, or another. And the only way to rectify that or to move past that or to fix it is to talk about it. And I
yeah,
think like that's why relationships don't work and why, you know, artists are dropped from labels or why artists leave labels or they get out of their deals or I mean, you know, and honestly, I think that that's for me why I really am fulfilled by working within this kind of lower pressure dance music, house and techno kind of market because the deals that we work are so much less pressure. It's like,
yeah,
okay, let's sign a couple masters and see how it goes, right?
yeah,
And it's just better because we can all kind of like feel out how it's
yeah,
working, you know? You don't have to feel locked in. You don't have to feel, you know, like this is the end all be all for you and your career. We can just see how it goes, both sides, and then hopefully it will be successful. And then if it's not, no worries. Like, you know, we
yeah,
can all move on and be happy and whatever. So I think that for me, that's really a nice way of working. And I think it's also just generally what artists deserve and want in this
one,
world.
yeah,
Like, you don't need to be locked into these multi-album, you know, perpetuity deals. Like, it's just ridiculous. I think it's like,
mm,
okay, let's do a 15 or a 20-year deal that has two masters. You know, maybe we have an option, maybe not, you know, but let's all be happy from the start and then do our best to make this successful. Period.
yeah. I think it's really hard as well as an artist because like
Mm,
there's deals that I can only speak from experience. There's deals that I've signed being
hmm.
happy from the get go because you have again you have an expectation of the record label, so you're willing to give more, right?
Mm,
So you're willing to give more master, not necessarily for more money, but you're just
right.
willing to give more because the expectation of the record label is they're going to perform or they're going to perform on certain things. Not everyone, not every time. You can't expect that, but
Hmm.
I think that's also where the sticking wicket kind of comes of like when these record labels are signing deals that just are taking all of the master or majority of the master,
Mm,
controlling the master over and over and over again, and kind of locking artists in. Like, there's pros and cons, mostly cons, but I guess was is that a specific thing that you guys didn't want to do as record labels?
yeah, absolutely. I think that was also a big part of back to what you were saying, asking about how the financials work, like with higher ground, or you know, you could even talk about life and death in this situation, or a lot of the labels that I work with and I'm affiliated with. Like there is, we wanted to go into this uh, applying a very flexible, fair structure for artists,
Yeah,
you know, and these are largely 50-50 net profit split deals.
Yeah.
These are deals with, not the craziest marketing budgets, but something that is mutually agreed upon and beneficial for both sides and realistic. And there are also deals that allow us to build a little bit, but without the idea of, I'm on this label for the next 5 years, and that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I've got to deliver
Yeah.
all of this. Like, that's just not how we're approaching these. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've kind of done quite well, and we've also developed a very good, I feel like me and my team have developed a really good reputation and a really good kind of perception within the larger kind of artist community. And I think that's why
Yeah.
it's like, even if we've worked records that haven't done that great, in the end, people aren't that, upset because, we aren't like locking them in, and we aren't like
Mm.
trying to be like, well, we own your master, forever, and, you're fucked. Like, no, we
Yeah.
don't approach it like that. We want to do the best by the artist and the project. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but if it doesn't work out, let's all just separate and, move on. And, that's just it. That's just how things go. Sometimes things do well, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
so yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your
No,
question,
totally.
but
I
yeah,
love it. I love it, man. Sam, I've genuinely really enjoyed this conversation.
yeah,
I
me
think a lot
too.
of
It's been
people.
really nice. Thank you so much.
I know we could keep going and keep
Yeah, we
talking, but I
could.
think people will just be like, "What the fuck?"
I know,
Um,
literally.
so I guess like, how can people get in touch with you? How's the like process of like you're pretty out there, if you know what I mean. So like,
Yeah,
how do people get in touch with you? How do people send you records? How's the best way?
yeah. I mean, I would say, if you're an artist or really anyone, and you're working on genuine, authentic art, like, please get in touch. Would love to know you. You can email me. It's just Sam at Mad Decent. If it's life and death related, it's Sam at lifeanddeath.us. Hit me up on Instagram, salmon, like the fish, 247. Yeah, and I would say like probably my biggest like little tidbit for anybody that's listening is like, I really like to hear everything that you're working on, and it doesn't need to be finished. Like, that's the one thing I feel like people are always sending me finished things. And I'm like, okay, great. But like, how can we develop a relationship here? How can we get this record? How can we build your project to something new? And I just want to say, don't be shy. Like, send me an unfinished idea, send me a 1 minute clip, send me a work in progress, like whatever it is. Like, I love working that way, and yeah, I'd love to hear what you're working on.
Big love, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you
Keep.
so much, Will.
I'm sure I'll see you in LA. I'm
Yeah.
actually in LA this week, so
Oh,
I'm sure I'll
amazing.
see
Let's
you.
hang.
Yeah, I'll hit you up.
Nice one.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Big love.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
And that's a wrap. Big love to Sam for coming on. Much love to everybody for listening. Please share. Please send it to your friends. Please tell people about this podcast. Much love. Till next time, people.